Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of Hearts for the Kingdom. Your favorite people are all in the room. We've got the men here, our better halves, right? We got Steve, say hi.
Hello.
Oh, we've got Gary.
Hiya.
And we got Monique.
Yes, here I am.
So we're all here, and I know you've been anxiously awaiting the cucumber episode.
Yes.
We're going to talk about sex, and to be perfectly honest, it's such a vulnerable discussion.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it. We all feel kind of naked and bare, though, as we're getting ready to talk about this. So
it is very hot in this room, so we might take out some layers.
Not actually naked and bare at the moment.
So anyway, I just want to start out by saying too that none of us are claiming to be sexperts today. We're just bringing our very real lives with the hope that it's going to help people. I think vulnerability and sharing wisdom, things we do different, challenges we've gone through, and it just helps people, and we don't want to hold that back. And this is a topic that the body of Christ doesn't talk about a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
And I think that's why people are so drawn to it, because the world certainly talks about it a lot.
Yeah.
But we don't need more of their perspective. We need God's perspective, and we're going to do our best to share that and what He has taught us over the years. We're going to share some opinions, I'm sure, today, but hopefully share some truths too. And I wanted to start us off with Gary and their story. Yeah. There's so much that they've gone through that the Lord has been so faithful to bring them through. And I just know there's so much that the listeners can learn from by hearing your story and where He's still bringing you through things.
Yeah.
But do you, Gary, want to maybe start out? He's excited. He's got his smirk on.
Oh, yes. Shoes on.
He's been looking forward to this.
I guess you guys weren't here all day because I got to experience just how excited he was for this moment. So
excited is a strong word. It's a word. I don't know if it's the right word. I can start because I think if we're going to have any conversation about sex, the context you bring to it is really important. And getting into a little bit of Monique and my history and where we came from is going to be valuable, and I think it provides a good framework for where our answers and our perspectives coming from. And it's one where our journey is still a little hard for me to talk about. I know Monique talks about it more freely and whatnot. For me,
it's just me.
It's just you, and that's good. I'm glad. But for me, I'm not at the place yet where I can really talk about our journey without it still causing feelings of pain and just a lot of things that come up with that. And so, because our journey is where we're at right now is amazing. And I'd say thank you, God, for how He's resolved things and how He's brought us forward and how He's worked in really deep pain. But at the same time, the journey of getting there, it can be really painful. And in our case, for me personally, it was the most painful experience of my life. And there's a period of time that I actively try not to think about because it still causes me pain to think about. Even though we've come past it and we're beyond it, it's still one of those moments where I don't go back to it because it's both pain and then also me making bad decisions because of the pain that I was in. And when you make a bad decision when you're in pain, you still have to own that decision, but it shows you a side of yourself that you may not like. And that's part of the heart of it. So our story really starts. Monique's the only person I've ever dated, period. No,
so sweet.
No other dates ever. We had met through homeschool things and, funny stories involved, friendship. I was friends with her brother. Then I started dating her. Then he was disappointed that I was dating her. Then he was really excited that I was dating her. All the things. But then we got married really young. We were both virgins when we got married. I was 20 and Monique was 22. And we brought very different ideas about sex into the marriage, because one of my challenges that I had was I got addicted to porn really young. I don't remember exactly how old I was, probably, 13, 14, something like that. I was a teen. That's about all I know for sure. But this was back in the days of dial-up internet and stuff. So
Lord.
I just,
Yeah.
believe me, I got access to dial-up internet. My parents did the absolute best they could. But if you're a smart, computer-oriented kid, you're going to find a way. And I found a way.
Slow dial-up porn.
Yeah.
Slow dial-up porn, the anticipation.
That was most of it.
I was exposed to it at a young age too, at a sleepover. So it was crazy. Yeah. Yeah, I was at a friend's house. I can't remember if it was a sleepover or if it was just hanging out at her house, but I just remember going to the computer, pulling up the dial up, and then she was trying to go to a site like my friend was, and I'm just like, oh, I don't want to see that, and I walked out. But that's how I was initially exposed as well.
Yeah, I wish I'd had that reaction.
Yeah.
Just walk out.
Yeah.
No, and instead it turned into that secret thing where I was like, I don't want to do this, but I'm doing it anyway, and it feels good in the moment. And then you feel really ashamed and horrible afterwards. And so I built up two things. I'd say one, unrealistic expectations of what sex was going to be, because that was my frame of reference. Christian family, we didn't really talk about sex in healthy or normal terms. It was sex is the topic you talk about maybe once a year, or you talk about a teeny bit before you're going to get married. Otherwise, it was just don't do it.
Just don't. Yeah. And don't even kiss was that your
was a
specific thing. Yeah.
It was a popular thing, I think, around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now that guy who started that whole movement's an atheist now, which is so sad.
I kissed dating goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah. He doesn't even believe in God anymore.
Yeah. Really, really sad. And I think shows that the mindset was a little problematic. And that's, I think, the point of this, where we'll get to, is that the topic of sex needs to be normalized in the Christian culture. And there are healthy, productive, good ways. God made sex. He intended for it to be good.
Absolutely.
It doesn't need to be this weird thing. And yet the more we make it a weird thing, the more potential for damage it has. So, but that was one, is I brought in unrealistic expectations. And then two, I brought in this hope that getting married would make it so I didn't have a need or desire for porn anymore, because now I was going to be able to have sex.
Yeah.
Right. So it was okay, I would tell myself, this is what I'm doing because I can't have sex yet. And it's not as, all the lies you tell yourself.
Yep.
So then we get married, and, wedding night comes. Unfortunately, Monique's talked about this, just health-wise, medically, we were not able to have sex, and we didn't know why. It was just we were told this is going to work, and then all of a sudden it didn't work.
Yeah.
There was just nothing. I mean, for context, it's Monique had vaginismus, which is an involuntary reaction of the muscles in the vagina, where it just nothing happens. It's
like trying to penetrate a brick wall, essentially. Yeah. And it's painful.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Monique,
like a knife.
Yeah. So I'm sure Monique is going, I thought this was supposed to be pleasant. And
Right.
I'm experiencing pain, and this is not working, and why not? And I'm sure there was all kinds of emotions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then we obviously didn't know what was going on. We didn't know why. We just knew something wasn't right, but we didn't know who to talk to.
Right.
Because when we did our premarital counseling, and I joke about this, but it's the truth. And I love the pastor we did our premarital. He's amazing.
Yes.
Truly is. Just in our premarital counseling, and I think premarital counseling in general doesn't spend enough time normalizing the topic of sex.
Right.
I remember we spent more time talking about, are you going to squeeze or roll the toothpaste?
Oh my gosh.
Than we did about sex.
Oh no.
Right?
I think we need to start doing premarital counseling for people.
I think talking about squeezing and rolling is okay, but maybe not the toothpaste.
I have heard that. I've heard that Pastor Stephen talks about it a lot. So I'm really grateful to hear that, because I've heard that with other people who are going through premarital, and they've had him, and he does talk about it regularly. So I'm super grateful for that, because that wasn't our experience, but.
Yes, and I only have one experience to go off of.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
There might be other pastors that are doing a phenomenal job with it. And if you are a pastor, if you're getting married, bring up the topic yourself. Make sure you're talking about it beforehand and normalizing it. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
So we go to have sex. Nothing happens. Not even nothing. just a traumatic, painful experience for both of us happens.
Yep.
Expectations. And then we try the next night and the next night and the next night, and it just never happens, essentially. I think we were able to partially have sex once within the first week. And then nothing for the next 7 years. And that, pushed a whole lot of buttons, as you can imagine. And my journey, this is the part that's still painful, is feeling confusion and powerless. And because this is a thing with my partner's body that I don't control, there's nothing I can do about it. I tried to look up material. Like I tried to research and solve the problem, because I'm like, how do I solve this problem?
Yep.
And I found, through research, I found like, oh, this is vaginismus. And I'd be like, hey, I think this is what it is. And Monique was in a place where she just wasn't in a place to hear anything related to it. And, we were young. Neither one of us knew how to handle a conversation.
Yeah.
And so every time I'd try to bring the topic of sex and fixing this up, it was a very painful conversation for both of us. And so we would just ignore it. And then I fell even harder into porn because I used it as a coping mechanism.
Yep.
I fell into trying to bury myself in the sand, if you will, with school or work or anything I could do, essentially, to numb it. Because sex isn't everything, but it is a very important core part of your marriage relationship. And when it's just completely off the table and you can't talk about it and you don't know how to talk about it, it's hard.
Yeah.
And then so through that, as all things do when you have a hidden sin, my side of things just kept escalating, where, it was more porn, just keep going down that path. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. And I was doing a pretty good job of keeping it hidden. But all hidden things come to light. And then so it goes from porn to looking for validation to being like, okay, there's something wrong with me? Like, is lots of feelings of insecurity, of being like, is the reason that Monique does, because at that point in time, I wasn't able to even try to think of it from your point of view. All I could think about it was my pain and the pain that I was suffering and where I was at. And so I was like, all of the reasons why we're dealing with this are because Monique doesn't love me enough to try to fix this.
For sure.
I'm not attractive enough for Monique to want to fix this. Like all these things where I'm like, I don't know why. And it's just,
wow.
And we had fallen away from going to church.
Oh yeah. We never went to church.
When we got married, and through natural life things, it was never a conscious decision, but as we got married and then we moved to Menominee because I was going to college. And so college student working essentially full time, I just didn't have time for church.
Well, you worked like every Sunday, I think. And
yeah, because of school hours, you work when you can. So I was closing, opening and closing on the weekends and working at Pizza Hut and stuff. And
and getting a lot of sexual talk over there.
Oh yeah, the restaurant conversation.
Oh boy,
like it.
I didn't get that at Denny's. Maybe I must have missed it.
Did you work at Denny's?
That was my first job.
No,
were you a cook?
Oh my gosh.
No, I wasn't a cook. I was a server.
That's the difference.
Well, we should have had you at the Exit 45 dinner the other day. Could have used your waitressing skills.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of the conversation there wasn't true either, but because of the nature of it, it was all guys as cooks, primarily talking about the different things that they did in college or were doing in college, going out and getting partying.
At least it was prolific and vulgar. So you had all that, right?
Exactly. And so I'm fully removed, and I didn't have any kind of support network.
Yeah, right.
Here, like I had no close friends that I could be open and vulnerable with. I didn't have, pastor or church friends because we weren't going that I could talk to and bring anything up with. You just kept it inside.
Yep. Right.
And so it kept growing and growing and growing.
It's a weird thing to talk about with family too.
Oh, for sure. I still don't know how to bring it up in a lot of cases, nor do I necessarily always want to bring it up.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I'm just curious to hear a little bit from Monique, like what was going on for you during this season? Like what were you feeling, thinking, how was your response when you brought up the Vaginismus books and those kinds of things, and where was your heart at, and where was that response coming from?
Yeah, totally. I think I had a lot of anger honestly, because I didn't know what it was. And I just had a lot of fear and anxiety in my life. And I think that this just kind of furthered that. Like, I guess like vaginismus is maybe even a fear response because you're afraid of what's going to happen, you know, or whatever, because you don't know.
You bet.
And I didn't have any education in that area. And so there was like a lot of unknowns. Like Gary said, like we had no education on it at all. I didn't have any kind of sex ed, nothing. There was like nothing that we had learned. So kind of going into that was just like confusion, anger, frustration. When Gary got the Vaginismus book, again, I just didn't want that to be wrong with me. I just wanted it to be right. And I kind of refused to even accept that it was actually a reality of mine because I just didn't want to even accept it. But I didn't feel like a woman. I didn't feel like a good wife. There was just like a lot of emotional things that I was feeling. So we just kind of ignored it, really, honestly. We would just ignore it or get angry. Like that's how I'd feel. I'd either ignore it or be angry.
And during the times that Gary wasn't ignoring it, but dealing with it in other ways, were you just kind of ignoring it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I would never even think about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I just like, because I guess for me, since I didn't know even that it was a good thing, really, because I had just been told, don't do it.
Right.
And so to me, I didn't even really know what I was missing. And I just like enjoyed our life, honestly, in a lot of other ways. Like we still hung out, played games, went on vacations. Like we had a really good time, to be honest, like in a lot of other areas. So I just kind of shut that part down, just didn't even realize what I was missing and really, you know, just kind of moved on, so honestly.
I want to pause because regardless of the situation or the struggles that you had or your response to it, doesn't matter that situation. What you just both described for what you were dealing with internally, your emotional battle, I think is the same for almost everybody where things aren't perfect. And I don't know of anybody where it's perfect, right? So the reality is what you're talking about relates to almost everybody who's listening, because what you're just describing is real for everyone, even if the situation looks really different. What you just both described is true for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
You having a struggle, how you deal with it, how you cope. So whether it's the situation you described that you were both dealing with or something in the sexual arena, that struggle is real. For Gary described, whether it's because your wife doesn't want you or your wife can't physically have you because of vaginismus, or your wife is putting her attention someplace else and not to you, you have the same struggle, right? So somebody listening whose wife doesn't have vaginismus may be very much experiencing exactly what Gary described, even if their situation looks
disconnected for another reason.
Yeah,
Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, a very different situation technically, but the core response is the same.
Yeah.
And for you, the same thing. Like, I just ignored it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter whether it's vaginismus or whatever the case was. You just ignored it. Well, if we ignore things or if we have struggles that are with needs that are unmet, for whatever reason, they result in this sort of downward spiral, right? Into just sort of yucky places.
Totally.
So it doesn't matter, people's listeners' experience. Those responses are normal human responses. And on this topic, because of just the intense personal nature of it, I could see that being real for people. So whatever you've shared for details almost doesn't matter. People hearing can relate to that, just so you know.
The thing that was resonating for me was whatever we have in the dark, whether we're ignoring it and stuffing it away, or we're hiding something. If we have something in the dark, that's Satan's domain.
Right.
And so if he's got dominion in that place, you're vulnerable.
Yes. Yes.
So you're vulnerable for other things to come slipping in. And if you shine light on it, that's where God can enter.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. I've been seeing that lately. I've been talking about that lately, how if you expose it, right? If you're humble and say, I'm struggling with this, you bring this to your community or whatever and say like, hey, I'm struggling with pornography, or I'm struggling with, this sexual thing or whatever, then the Lord can kind of meet you there. But otherwise it gets exposed. Like whatever is hidden will come out eventually. And so it's like you kind of lose control when you don't say something, because then you know what's going to come out. Everything always comes out eventually,
That's the mercy of God.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like,
I know.
oh, it's painful.
Yeah.
So, but
I know. So it's better if we,
merciful.
in any situation, not just related to sex or porn or whatever, but it's like if there's something that you're struggling with, to be vulnerable with someone else. Because that's the thing. I think that Christians can kind of have this false perception that we need to have it all together. And it can make us even struggle to talk about it openly with our friends, or like, I struggle with this or that, because you're afraid of judgment.
Yeah.
Well, we're not supposed to have judgment. Judgment in itself is a sin.
Yeah.
So if you're already worrying about that, you're worried that they're going to be sinning in the response to you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But
I appreciate your openness, Gary.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought it was helpful to hear, like, well, what's going on with Monique during this time too? Because
and now I'm listening to Gary and how he talked about how he got that Vaginismus book and the dilators and things like that. And I just want to thank you for your heart in that, because I can see your heart in it, that you wanted to help me. And I'm sorry that I didn't accept that in the moment, because the truth is that is a great resource, and like the information that you found was spot on and real, and I'm sorry I didn't accept that back then, because if I had, maybe we would have gone through it sooner. But it is a great resource. So if anyone is struggling with vaginismus or anything like that, I do recommend those books and dilators, because if you're in the right headspace, there are amazing resources out there to help women going through that. And you found a great resource, and I just wasn't ready to accept it yet.
Yeah, I think it's whenever anything is causing you pain, the first reaction for most people is to compartmentalize it and put it away and just get away from the pain.
Yeah.
And we handled it in different ways for sure, but it wasn't a one-sided, like, I'm not the only one that was in pain during this. Monique was obviously dealing with a lot of things as well. And so for us then, right, 7 years is a long time. As newlyweds, and like Monique said, a lot of our marriage was really good. And our life was in a lot of ways really good. And there's a lot of really good times and memories and things, but there's this one piece that kept being, not there, and we would ignore it. And so 7 years would go by and we'd keep getting triggered by more things, because if you can't have sex and you hear other people talking about having sex, you get angry and frustrated. If you see friends your age having kids, you get angry and frustrated. If you have people come up to you and say, oh, when are you guys going to have kids? And all you want to do is just slap them and say, just leave me alone. And it doesn't matter if it's because of
I just want to say that is such a good thing to point out. People need to be so cautious when you ask a newlywed or whatever about those things, like when you're going to have kids. That is such a personal trigger for me, because there's so many different things that people go through, whether it be infertility, vaginismus. There's more things that people go through besides vaginismus. There's other terms, and that I've talked to other people who have had other things like it. And people go through these things. They're real. And so if you ask them, like, when they're going to have kids or whatever, like, that can be super painful. So anyway, I think it's just people need to be careful sometimes with those questions. But anyway.
Very much so. That's what I was going to say as well.
Yeah.
That there are more causes, rather than not being able to have sex, to, like you said, infertility. But it's all these things that can trigger you, and they just keep causing, and the pain keeps stacking.
Yep. Right.
And so then we get to, 7 years, and I had made bad decisions that stacked and compounded. And so we had a moment where we were about to go on a vacation. We were doing a road trip to Oregon and then back. And one of Monique's friends texted her like, hey, this looks like Gary. And it was one of the choices I had made, to put myself out there in a way that I shouldn't have. And so Monique brought it up, and at first I didn't want to even confess to, what I had been doing or the paths that I'd started going down. And, so we get in the car, and obviously it's tense and it's not good. And we were driving, and we made it to, I don't know, it was Montana or something. And then go to bed, and God wakes us up kind of both, and he gives Monique a specific thing to ask. And he was telling me, you got to tell her what you're dealing with. You can't just keep hiding this. And so Monique brought it up, and then I responded, and then we were able to, on that trip, actually have a lot of healing that started, and we were able to actually start communicating. And Monique had a lot of compassion and grace for me and where I was at. And, you know, that gets us there. And the thing though, that I do think gets missed a lot in a lot of testimonies is sometimes something like that happens, which is an event that starts you on the path back, but it doesn't fix things immediately. And so we get back home, and our church was offering a class for guys that were struggling with porn. It's the first and only time I've ever seen our church offer that.
Yes.
You know,
it had never been in the brochures before that or after.
Yep.
It was that 1 week.
Yep. So I had to make some choices of, I don't control Monique. I can't solve this problem, but my addiction is the thing that I can. That's mine. That's what I have to deal with.
Yeah.
Same with, I have to take steps of faith. Essentially, when Monique says that she's going to try to find some solution, or that she's willing to start talking about it or thinking about it, I have to take a step of faith and believe her, because I have to make the changes myself to put me in a better spot for us, but also for myself. Like, I have to get in a better place for myself, but I have to still keep trusting that Monique's going to do her thing, because I still have no control over her or her body. So for me, everything came to light. I'm starting a path towards right things and, you know, breaking free of addiction and that, and thank God for that class and the people in it. And I was able to, you know, break free, and it's been so much better not having to carry those hidden things. But I still had to then say, I still have to wait, because I'm not in control of this, and I have no idea if it's going to be resolved. And so that's the part that I think is, in some testimonies, glossed over. You may have a moment that starts you on the right path. It doesn't solve the problem immediately, always. Sometimes God does. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That wasn't our journey. And so I still then had another, you know, what is it, 6 months, something like that.
It was about 4 or 5.
Yeah, about 4 or 5 months where I was still in the same place of, I don't know if we'll ever be able to have sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we were. And now we have a daughter, and things are a lot better. But
it did work.
it did work. We have the proof.
Yeah.
No, and a lot of things have gotten so much better. And that's why, you know, praise God for where we are today, and so many good things, and so many good things have come from it.
Yeah.
But the core issue, even still, of communication, and that's why it's very personal and passionate for me, is communication in marriage is so incredibly critical. I cannot express to people how important it is, not just about sex, but about everything. Because when you have two people with two very different ideas on things, and if you don't have a way of talking peacefully and where you're both working towards the same goal, it's just a breeding ground for resentment on one side or the other. And that's where I had let myself fall in so many different places of being powerless in our relationship. Of, I had, again, going back to, never dated, came from a strong Christian family, strong, you know, traditional Christian views on marriage. And it was the husband sacrifices for the wife. That was the main message. And so everything I did was, I may want this, but I'm going to sacrifice for Monique in this way, which is, I'd say, wanting to sacrifice for your spouse is a very good mindset to have, but it has to be done from a place of godly love, not from I'm just going to sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because then you just turn yourself into a martyr, and it's not a good place to be either. So still having to work through some of those things, and the 7 years afterwards, because that's where it's been, about 7 years since then, since we were making
8.
progress.
Well, yeah. I mean, River's kind of the timestamp.
Yeah, that's what I look at.
She'll be 8.
She'll be 8. Yeah, we have a timestamp.
Yeah, by the time that this comes out, she'll be 8.
Yeah. So
then you do the 8 plus the 9 months plus, so about 9 years now, actually.
yeah, so 9 years. And I've had to unlearn other behaviors, not just that, but like, how do you handle communication? How do you address topics? How do you, not even around sex, when something comes up and you're feeling powerless? Because that's what I'm still dealing with and having to unwind. And I'm not there yet. Triggers around being powerless, because it created such a deep wound in me, that pain from being powerless in a situation and seeing the bad choices that I can fall into, and the version of myself that I never wanted to see and never thought was even possible.
Yeah.
To then other situations that are not saying, they're not similar, but they're the same. You don't have control And it brings back all those feelings of fear and panic of like, I don't want to go back down there again. And so that's where it's still not comfortable for me to talk about even, because it's like, how do you work through that? But that's probably a conversation for a different day.
Yeah.
Today is about sex.
Right. Well, and you identify a good one too, which is the willingness to sacrifice and give, but avoid being in a martyr status, right? And I think I had a coworker once years ago who said, marriage, Steve, whatever you learn in life as you grow up, know that marriage is not a 50-50 deal. Marriage is a 100-100 deal. And if one spouse is giving 100 and the other spouse isn't giving 100, or is gladly taking the 100 but not giving back, and there are all kinds of seasons in life where that looks different, right? It's never like this perfect balance every day, but a committed heart to help and commit to each other, to give in that way, sacrificially, is like essential to success.
I agree. So anything you'd add, babe? Because that's, I know there is, but that's kind of from my perspective, the journey to where we are.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that, being real.
One thing that stuck out to me is, although it felt like forever, those 7 years, as soon as light shone in to what was going on and you humbled yourself, Gary, to me, when you look at 7 years and what God accomplished in 4 or 5 months is pretty incredible. And how he redeemed that situation in 4 or 5 months and brought life from it. You know what I mean? Like a human being. That's incredible.
Yeah, I agree.
And, and to me, I see like, okay, you had no control. Okay. But look at God's faithfulness.
Yes.
And any time you feel a lack of control, because we've all been there. It can look different. It's looked different for me in different seasons where I felt like I literally have no control right now. And it brings me to my knees and I go, okay, God, I trust you.
Yeah.
You can take control of this situation, because I certainly don't have it. And then I look back and see his faithfulness of how he then broke through for me. Once I surrendered that to him, it makes it so much easier every time I feel that sense of I don't have control anymore. I go back to, but my daddy was so faithful to me.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I don't need to have control. And I know I'm in the sweet spot of the Lord being able to actually move and bring things into life through me and in my life if I'm at that place of surrender. And so I'm okay. I'm becoming more and more okay with not having control in my life.
Yeah.
Because it's actually like this false perception that I have control over anything at all.
Right. Isn't that the truth? Yeah. We don't want the control because we fail.
Oh, I know. Don't put me at the helm.
Right. The part that absolutely wrecks me is exactly that, is that God knew exactly when he wanted River in this world. And he knew that we needed to get our ducks in a row to make that happen. And so it's really cool that, Gary, alluded to the fact that it's getting so hot in here. I wish we had video. Like everyone is stripping off their clothes right now. This room is burning out up here.
More of a shedding layers than stripping off things.
We can open a window too, by the way. Feel free, Gary, any point. Oh, crack that baby open. But yeah, no, it absolutely wrecks me because I believe that God had, the exact timing that he wanted River here on this earth. And so all of our ducks needed to get in a row for that to happen. And Gary, he alluded to the fact that, hidden things were exposed, and that's exactly what happened. And I didn't know what to deal with, the information that I had gotten. But I know when I presented the information, there was, evading in that moment happening. And I'm Inspector Gadget inside. I'm a detective through and through. And, when things like aren't adding up, I was like, something's just like not right. And it almost cost us like going cross country. Like we were going to go on a 27 car ride to Oregon.
27 hours.
Yeah, in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's going to be this place that we could be very close and, have conversation. And Gary was, just like not kind of dealing with exactly what I was presenting at the moment. But anyway, so Gary and I, we get in the car, we start driving to Oregon, and all of a sudden we're just like having these conversations. None of us is really like knowing what's going on. And we get to Montana and we both wake up and God was telling me, ask him this question, because there was just like something that just like wasn't adding up. And so then God told Gary the same thing, you need to tell her about this. And the really cool thing is I remember texting my mom on the car ride and telling her what was going on. And the cool part was that she was not condemning at all. And she was like so supportive in the moment and encouraging and being like, you can get through this, which was like really cool because she was like the only person that I was talking to. And it was somebody who was saying like, you can get through this. And my friend was the same way. I remember I had a close friend at the time and I told her as well. And she was also super encouraging. So it was like really helpful. Neither one of them were judging us. Neither one of them were saying like, get out of this marriage, anything like that. But it was like being supportive and like, you'll get through it. And I think that it can be really easy to take a stance of like, oh, you need to get out or, whatever, when God wanted to do something in our lives. And so I was so thankful that I had a support system who was like, you can get through this. So I just remember once the truth came out, like God's presence in that car was probably some of the most tangible that I've ever felt in my entire life, where I just felt him all over me and I felt his love over me and I felt his love over Gary. And I just saw him wanting to just like make us clean, and just like work this whole thing out for good. And Gary and I ended up having a really good trip. We had a lot of like good conversation that needed to happen. So when we get back, the really cool thing is my mom, she was able to give me resources that got me through vaginismus, because another friend that she had known had went through that and went to a physical therapist who was able to help them get through the same thing. So I connected with the therapist. So at the same time I'm getting connected to this physical therapist, Gary was able to go to these classes at church to get free from pornography. So God was walking us both through step by step the things that we needed to do to own what we could in our portion of the things that we were dealing with. So God just totally came in. I mean, that is some of the most memorable, amazing things. Like, it still gets me emotional to this day to think about how he had planned all of that. And I remember he told me in December, God did, I was sitting in the couch at our old house, and he said, you're going to have a baby next year. And by next year, so by 2016, you are going to have a baby. And I said, God, that's impossible. Like, that that's not even a possibility for me. And at that time, I was going through therapy, but I still didn't believe that I was going to get through it. And I knew, though, in my heart that it was true. I knew that what he spoke to me, that it was him and it wasn't a me thought. And the really cool thing is that in January, so it was just 3 weeks after he told me that, we were able to have sex. And it was on a night that Gary had come home from one of those classes at church. And it was just amazing to see the therapy and just how it worked and the different things that the therapist helped me through. That night, it just all made sense. And the things that she told me to do, I was able to utilize. And just God brought us together in that moment. And it was such a memorable night. And I just remember being so emotional and just being man, I feel like a woman, Yeah. And it was just so encouraging. And then I remember then going into the next months and just being Gary, God told me that we were going to have a baby. And I said, just pray about it. Cause he wasn't sure, he thought, well, we're just getting into this sex thing. I don't know about a kid already, but God knew, that the time was now, for a river to come. And so it was within 2 months from then that we got pregnant, and she was born December 2016. So it's 1 year from when God told me that I was going to have a baby. She was born. And I just think that's such a beautiful thing, just seeing his heart and all of that. And has it been absolutely like perfect? Has our sex life? No, actually, it kind of was not great during pregnancy. I mean, it was pretty much non-existent like during that time as well, because that was a whole other thing. And I was dealing with some other things. Robyn could talk a whole podcast about that.
Entered into her life.
Yeah, truly. Yeah. Yeah. We had known each other, but that was definitely when Robyn and I got to know each other more, and she walked me through a lot of different things. But again, that's a whole other side of the journey, but that's kind of what God brought us to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's important when we were able to start having sex. Sex is like anything else. You have to practice at it. You have to work at it. It doesn't just magically all of a sudden, like, again, throw out everything you've seen in the movies about magical, amazing first night. Like it's like anything.
Right.
You work at it and it gets better and you get to know each other more and you get more comfortable. And so you have to have really real expectations of sex is an amazing, beautiful thing that God gave you, but it's also a thing that you grow in throughout your entire life.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like you don't, okay, that made me laugh inside my head. I was going to use an analogy of you don't go run a marathon day one.
Yeah.
And then I realized in the context of sex, people are like, a marathon? Anyway.
Always practice early and often. That's the key.
Point being is you have to actually both be committed to working at it. And that's okay. And if things don't go perfectly, that's okay. Just be willing to talk to each other about it and have conversation and be willing to work at it just like you would anything else. Like you don't learn to cook immediately. You practice, you try different things. That's what sex is. You practice and try different things and you find out what works for you guys and what you like. And you know, it to me, it's, if we end the story with, you know, God resolved everything, he got us to a place it's true, but it's also like it got us to the starting line where we could actually start working together on building that side of the relationship.
Definitely.
It wasn't like we instantly got 7 years worth of experience in that moment. It was, no, we now are at the starting line and we're in a spot where we can work together. And then we also, more importantly for me even, is started to develop ways to communicate on hard subjects. That weren't completely combative, because that's what we had been before. It was just butting heads because we were both in pain.
You bet.
And so we also learned ways of, okay, how do we talk about a hard topic that's not just pain and coming after each other? So
can I be real with my insecurity too, and just like what God has shown me recently as well?
Yeah, go for it.
So Gary and I, like going through that, I still had some insecurities because obviously when you're a wife and you find out that your husband's been dealing with pornography for like 7 years, like that's a hard thing to realize. It made sense to me, you know, honestly. I really had no judgment when I found that out. Was I upset? Yeah. But judgment? No. I understood it. Like I got it. It made sense. I was like, yeah, of course you're going to have struggles. Like this has not been easy. And for me to just like assume that he had no struggles and wasn't coping with this in any way, that would have been really, I don't know, just childish thinking and not think that he was having major struggles with all of that. But again, I was just trying to ignore it. So when it kind of came out, I was like, it made sense. Honestly, I was like, yeah, I get it. Didn't mean it was right, but it made sense. And I didn't have any judgment. I just like saw his pain, and God kind of helped me see that I was like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. But anyway, something that I've realized recently is that sometimes he'll get like a text message or, you know, whatever will pop up on his phone, and just because of different things that we had gone through and texting, you know, people, things like that shouldn't have been, I would get these moments where it would hit me and I would be like, who are you texting? You know, just kind of like from an insecure place. And we've had conversations recently that have been much more healthy. Like recently, God gave me this dream that instead of reading the Bible one morning, Gary was reading comic books. And I brought that to him and I was like, Gary, God gave me this dream that instead of reading the Bible this morning, you were reading comic books. And I went down and told him that. And basically that's what had happened. Like God showed me in real time. Like I was like dreaming in the morning, this was happening. It was true. And Gary told me recently, he's like, you know what? if you ever get a dream like that or discernment, totally good. Talk to me about that. Like if it's coming from God and discernment and God's putting on my heart, instead of just like that insecure, who's texting you? You know, like it's a totally different communication point. Like if the Lord is like leading you into conversation, it's going to come out in a way that's loving and good instead of just like an insecure, who's that? You know, and then that just like rears your flesh up. So it's kind of helped me realize like, oh yeah, there are still a few triggers that I have from the past. And it's helped me to now communicate in a way that's more loving. And if it comes from God instead of just like a fleshly feeling, you know?
And also I'm sure you've been pursuing the Lord on healing those places, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I feel like he's done a lot of healing, you know, for sure. And I know like Gary's heart now, you know, like through it, I've seen it. And I just know that God is just making it all work together for good. Like I see that.
Yeah. I think it's important. I think in a marriage, you should have godly accountability to each other. Trust God to help your spouse and come from a place of love. Also know that if your spouse is healing from something, if you keep poking it, it's a lot harder to heal when you're constantly getting poked in the area that you made a mistake. So for me, it was years of the worst mistake of my life being thrown in my face, being like, okay, doesn't matter. Just relive it again. And I don't, you know, Monique obviously didn't realize that's what it was doing for me. But that's the effect it was having on me is I never knew when or how or what trigger would cause it to have the worst decision I ever made thrown in my face. And again, like I want Monique to come from a godly place of saying, hey, God's putting on my heart. Are you okay? Like check in with me, hold me accountable, help me to be like, that's what you're supposed to do. And I'm supposed to do that to you. But it's also just be aware in your relationships, not even just marriage, it's your relationships. When you say things offhand, you might be poking something that they're healing from and reopening that wound. It's still on them to heal. It's still on me and my responsibility to heal and work with God through it. It just makes it a lot harder when somebody's actively sticking the spot that hurts.
Right. Does it sound accusatory or does it sound actually legitimate concern, words of concern, right?
Exactly.
I know for me, because I've dealt with my own insecurities, and it has never been from like something Steve was doing necessarily or even intentionally, right? But I'll come to him and say, hey, I'm dealing with insecurity right now. And I haven't, you know, for one example, it's like, I haven't heard you say that I'm beautiful or affirm me in any way in a long time. And I just want you to know that it would go a long way for me because this is something I'm wrestling with right now. And so then it's not like me going, hey, you've been a crappy husband and you're not telling me I'm beautiful. And you know what I mean? It's more of like, this is me. I'm struggling with this thing. And I want you to know that I'm struggling with this. And one of the ways that you could help me with my struggle is if you were to give me some affirmation. I'm not telling you you're doing things wrong, but if you would, I'd love it. And it just clues them into like, okay, this is the mental warfare that she's dealing with right now. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with me. It's her thing, and he can pray for me, which is another thing I'll tell him. I'm like, pray for me because I'm just struggling right now. And that way he can be there for me. He knows what he can do for me that will help me in that place. But it's owning my own stuff too.
Totally.
You know, so for you to be like, hey, I'm wrestling with this insecurity monster right now, and I just want you to know that. And so, and sometimes they'll be like, can you just tell me everything's okay? You know, and I'll just be like, everything's okay. You know, and I'm like, thank you. I just need to hear that, you know? And because we all have these things that we're wrestling with, and we just need to call it what it is instead of having it come out in these like unhealthy ways, you know? And then all of a sudden you're poking a wound in somebody else, you know, unknowingly.
Right.
Totally.
I think something that's kind of come up has been this like okay, how are we doing sex in our kingdom mindset, and how do we handle this? How do we raise up young men and women to know about sex and what God intended, and how do we navigate that, and what does that look like, and having unrealistic expectations, and if we do it and pursue it in a way that God wants, which is we wait until marriage, how do we help people then have those expectations? And, it's something that now I feel like, 17 years in, I'm finally having a more complete picture of like, oh, this is what God intended. And it makes my heart sad to realize, how much I didn't know and how much better we could be doing. And even for me now with teenagers, I'm like, okay, God, it's not too late, but I do wish I would have even done some things differently. But I think there's some myths that we need to address. There are listeners who I'm sure are in all stages. And I think it's important to share the truth, which is, sex is not just a physical act. It is the coming together of a physical body with another physical body. The two become one, but it's also your soul and your spirit coming together.
Can I just interject there really quick? I was listening to something yesterday, and they talked about having sex outside of marriage and how you are putting Jesus through that. If you are a Christian, you are linking your soul to somebody else, and you have Jesus in you, so you're subjecting Jesus to that. I was like, wow, I had never thought about it in that way before. But wouldn't that be with any sin, that we're subjecting Jesus to that?
Right. I think it just grieves him when he sees us. Because it hurts us. And he doesn't want to see us going through that either. But I know for myself, I did not have the appropriate view of what this act really is, and that it's really the way that we seal a covenant between two people. And a covenant is different than a contract, right? And I think a lot of people look at marriage as just a piece of paper and a contract. There's something much holier that happens. And the very act of coming together through sexual intimacy is like the sealing of this covenant. And every time we come together again, it's a reminder of this covenant that we've made with one another. And we're coming together in a level that's not just physical. And strong marriages, I really believe people are actively having intimacy, having sex on the regular. And if they can't for a physical reason or whatever, they're finding other ways to be intimate with one another on the regular, because that, I think, is one of the most powerful ways that we can keep the enemy from driving us apart. And it's what makes us different. Like when you guys were married, you were like best friends, but you weren't coming together with that way of sealing the covenant, and it was causing utter chaos, and so there is something very, very precious and holy about that act. But when the world looks at it as just this physical thing to do for pleasure, for self-gratification, it totally demeans what it is, and pretty soon it has no value. And then pretty soon marriage has no value, anymore. And so we need to understand like the heaviness of it.
And just like the thing that's just hitting me right now too is just the temptation that people fall into if they're not in a regular sexual relationship with their partner. I think about how many Christian men have fallen to sexual sin in the past couple of years. I mean, there are documentaries on Hulu and Netflix about huge Christian ministers. Well, I think about Jerry Falwell with Liberty University and just like all of that, and just how like sex can be so perverted And temptation can come upon the men. And if they're not, built up by their wives, and I'm not even saying it's the wives' fault, like everyone has choices to make in these situations, but it's just so important to make sure that that relationship is kept up so that temptation doesn't come in and that you don't find yourself in a situation like that. Because man, when that becomes exposed, it's heartbreaking. And it's so hard to see that happening right now in the church. And I wonder if it's because these men, like, think about that. If you are a president at a Christian university or things like that, if you're struggling with those temptations, maybe it's hard for Christians to talk to their brothers and say, like, I'm struggling with this, like, or I'm even struggling with pornography, because you want to appear to be a certain way. And if there's not that open communication and dialogue that you have with your brothers and sisters in Christ to be able to talk about that, I think that that's just a catalyst for having that sin just get out there and become what it is.
I also think that people can be having sex on the regular, but not be connected. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And I think what the Lord's really been showing me more recently is it was designed to be this discovery of one another and serving and pleasing another person. And what the world has made it into is self-gratification. And it starts with teaching our children that masturbation is okay and should be gone after. It feeds this beast of self-focus, self-gratification, and kind of awakening this hunger within them to feel good, and that's all this is about. When really it's about, how can I bring pleasure to this person that I intimately love, and discovering them. And when both people are doing that, that is when something truly beautiful happens, where you're both serving one another, and life can even come out of it, but immense pleasure and connection can come out of it, versus it being this act where I'm just there to get my fill, and that's all I'm interested in. It becomes this, and I think that's where sometimes it becomes like almost like one-sided, and there can be resentment in the relationship, because it's like, oh, this is all about you, and that's the world's kind of view on it, though, and that it's really got twisted on its head from what God's real intent was. But it's messy in the beginning. It's uncomfortable in the beginning. It's awkward in the beginning. And so we watch these fairy tales on TV and we think like, oh Hollywood. My God, it's going to be this amazing experience in the beginning. And it's awkward. It is. But it's beautiful at the same time, because you're discovering one another. And I think if we set people up with that expectation, that like, look, this is it's not gonna be perfect, right? This is a journey of the Lord bringing you to a place that's beautiful and perfect, but it's gonna take some time to get you there. The goal right now is for you to discover your spouse. And the goal isn't an orgasm. The goal is for you to discover your spouse. What makes them feel good. Discover every little crevice on their body. You know what I mean? Like, that is what God wanted. Instead of it being all about me. Does that make sense? And so that's where I think everything needs to be twisted on their head, and like, we need to set this right now. And so if it's not about that, you're not looking at it the right way.
Right. I
know. Do you have thoughts about that? You haven't said much, Steve. You have thoughts about that?
Agreed. I think, again, the 100% give, right? 100 a relationship. And that's what the world says, is just the opposite. It's all about you. It's all about your pleasure. It's all about your gratification. When in reality, God's plan is always 180 degrees opposite of what Satan's plan is, right? Because God creates it all. Satan can't create anything. He has no creative power. And if you don't understand that principle, then I think you're automatically set up for a shortage of understanding. But if you understand Satan can't create anything, but he can pervert anything that's out there, and that's what he does. He takes and perverts it to make it awful. And so he takes the topic of sex and intimacy and makes it just the opposite of what God wants and what he designed. And then proliferates it and puts it in front of everybody's face and makes it part of the culture and says it's all normal. And if you aren't in this place, you're weird and everything else. And so just like everything that goes on in the world, if you don't realize that you have to just unplug from the world and plug into God to get the truth and get like what's really good and truly satisfying and truly pleasurable and amazing life-giving from God by getting out of the world, I think you've just missed the opportunity to live the best life here on this earth that you can by plugging into your creator instead of the perverter.
That's good.
But the perverter's in your face. I mean, you flip open Facebook and he's in your face. You flip open Instagram, he's in your face. You open the internet, he's in your face. It's just everywhere you go, right? And those are all tools that can be used for amazing good, but he looks to pervert it all. And he's taken this and perverted this for decades, right? And made it just front and center. Sexual revolution, it's all about you. It's all about making things great for you. And you just described it perfectly. It's about really exploring and pleasing your spouse. And in that give relationship, amazing things happen.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. We are going to continue this dialogue next week. And we're excited. We're going to talk a little bit more about Steve and I and our sexual testimony. So catch you then. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, make sure you share it with your friends and also subscribe so when we do release a new episode, you will be the first to know it.
And please be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook. We also have a new Facebook group where you guys can come in and dive into conversation with us, ask us questions. So we would love to see you there as well.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you there.